So today we're going to talk about the pitfalls of EMS in psychiatric care. This is based off of the problems that I've seen predominantly in the EMS world, but I think that a lot of these principles can apply to in-hospital operation as well. Now, this is a systematic issue that I couldn't even condense into a 30-minute video if I tried, but I did go ahead and identify 4 of the biggest factors that I think could use improvement, just drawing from what I personally have seen. So the first factor is escalation of volatile patients. For the longest time, EMS instruction has kind of centered around 2 different treatment modems. The first one being therapeutic communication, and the second one being restraints. And we can't just go 0 to 100 like that, and just not black and white. There's a lot in between the 2 of those things before you get to option number 2. When we talk about using therapeutic communication, I think a lot of us tend to operate within a certain amount of time, meaning that if the patient's not consolable within 15 minutes of your on-scene time, people tend to kind of escalate the situation in order to facilitate a transport decision, and we shouldn't do that. If something is taking too long, we shouldn't be gauging it based off of our own frustration. We should be reevaluating the efficacy of our interventions up to that point. Also of note, the volatile patient is not necessarily an angry patient more than it is a hyper-aroused and easily influenced patient. So when we show up on scene, how is our demeanor going to impact the behavior from that point forward exhibited by our patient? With that in mind, you should additionally consider the risk in adding law enforcement to the call. Consider that when people interact with the police department, it is most frequently because they are in trouble. So when you add the police to a psychiatric call, they might think that they are in trouble. So you need to be conscientious of the risk of escalation when adding law enforcement to the call. Now, you shouldn't be prioritizing that over personal, crew, and patient safety. If there's a legitimate risk for bodily harm and there's a primary aggressor that you cannot de-escalate, you need to add law enforcement. Police officers have specialized non-lethal weapons that they can use to take somebody down if that patient becomes aggressive. We don't really. We have meds, but when you're in a full-blown brawl, it is kind of hard to land a needle in the right place and not nick someone else inadvertently on the way to the patient. So just remember that. You also shouldn't be proceeding into a scene that is not safe. So if this patient is barricaded with a weapon, do not try to be the hero and try to go in there and de-escalate them. That is law enforcement's job, not ours. Yes, it is your responsibility to continue de-escalation after a threat has been neutralized, but neutralizing that threat is not our job, and we are not trained to do that. So, you could get a lot of people hurt by trying to. The patient's behavior and the risk that it poses to your safety, your crew's safety, and the patient's safety should be thoroughly evaluated, and based off of your assessment, the addition of law enforcement should be contextualized accordingly. So don't add law enforcement for no reason, and don't add them if you think that you can handle it and there is no threat of harm to you, your crew, or the patient. Remember that just because somebody is schizophrenic does not mean that the police need to be there. That's just wild. Having delusions, behaving erratically, it's not a crime. You should be adding them because they are a viable resource, not because they are a threat. It's a good way to really cause a good amount of distrust in uniformed services, which we've already done enough damage ourselves. In that same vein, we have to discuss involuntary transport. So involuntary transport includes people who are a threat to themselves, to others, and are not within capacity to make decisions for themselves. There are a wide range of reasons why somebody could not be in capacity to take care of themselves, but you need to be mindful of each and every possibility. When we are navigating a patient who is hyper-aroused, agitated, and does not want to go with you to the hospital, you need to be able to communicate in a very gentle way and tactfully give the illusion of control back to the patient. Think about how scary it is for a whole bunch of strangers with loud radios and dirty boots to come up in your house and then tell you that you have to go somewhere against your will. That's not pleasant. No 2 ways to cut it. Maintain empathy and keep a calm, level voice. If you are at the point where you have determined this patient needs to go to the hospital, whether they decide to go voluntarily or not, you should first phrase it as, well, based off what you're telling me and the things that I'm seeing, I think that it would really benefit you to go up to the hospital. And I think that's probably in your best interest. Be transparent about why you think they need to go to the hospital and whether or not they agree. Sometimes you can't really control that. But the point is that you are trying to instill a sense of trust, that you are acting in the patient's best interest and they can believe that you are acting in their best interest. The goal is that they go to the hospital to be able to access resources that they wouldn't otherwise have access to on their own. Remember that the end goal is supposed to be independence regained by the patient upon discharge. If the first statement doesn't work, continually, gently, and transparently explain why they should go up. I'm really sorry, and I understand you want to stay home, but it's for your own safety that you come with us up to the hospital. Following this statement, still continue to try to give the patient the illusion of control, give them some ounce of control in the situation, and say, you do need to go up to the hospital. Do you want to go up in the ambulance, or do you want to go with the police officer in his car? Phrasing the question that way makes law enforcement look like another option for help rather than a threat of going somewhere against their will. Do not say, well, you can either go with us or go with the police. When you phrase it like that, you are weaponizing law enforcement and you are threatening the patient to make a decision because they are not allowed to think for themselves. Those are two very different feelings. So, unfortunately, not everyone is able to understand why they need to go up, and many will vehemently refuse transport. And in that case, unfortunately, sometimes people do need to be restrained. So when you do restrain somebody, do not ever lay them prone. It can cause sudden respiratory arrest in a lot of cases, and your patient can die due to your own negligence. You should absolutely have paramedics or other ALS level care on scene that can administer anxiolytics, because if you are going to tie someone down and take them somewhere against their will, please God, at least help them calm down. I mean, it's only humane. Taking someone to the hospital against their will is a huge deal and should be navigated with a huge amount of empathy, regardless of the necessity of involuntary transport. That kind of leads into the next factor of ignorance to risk potential. So what happens when we have a patient who qualifies for involuntary transport and we don't transport them? What happens? Well, when assessing the psychiatric patient or any patient that is erratic in their thought, maybe they have flight of ideas or bizarre speech patterns and can't really communicate properly with you, you should conduct what is called an unstructured interview, where you are allowing them to guide a lot of the assessment by getting them to talk. A lot of what they do say and a lot of what they don't say can be very useful information to help inform you on what the best next steps are and how your behavior can impact them. So identifying triggers, identifying stressors in their lives, identifying if they even have a reliable support system that they could go home to, things like that. Are they able to financially support themselves enough to refill prescriptions and seek out routine professional care, alongside the physical and cognitive assessment of the patient, because those are very influential factors. If you've ever taken a Psychology 101 course or AP Psychology in high school, you've probably heard of the 4 Ds: deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. They all are exactly what they sound like. So deviance, how far have they deviated from baseline? How detached are they from reality? How distressing is the experience of the mental health crisis, and will that cause them to act erratically? Will it cause them to engage in self-injurious or suicidal behavior? Dysfunction would mean, how badly is this interrupting their day-to-day life? Are they able to function appropriately in order to support themselves? Can they feed themselves adequately? And those 3 things, accompanied by the 4th, I mean, its 3 predecessors could really lead you to number 4, but number 4 would be danger. So, how dangerous is their behavior? This is not specific to suicidal or homicidal ideation. It also needs to be considered when you are addressing situations of excited delirium or psychosis, because for whatever reason, these old school, dust collecting, closed-minded providers love to just pass off psychotic episodes as being drug-induced or the patient being purposefully deviant. Ignoring any of these factors could lead us to paint a very inaccurate picture of what is going on for the patient, and that can lead us to intervene in all of the wrong ways. Next, I think it is important that we address that a big barrier to psychiatric care for a majority of our patients is the fact that providers will harbor a good amount of judgment of the patient's character based off of the erratic and bizarre behavior that they're seeing that patient display. Too often we take deviant behavior and classify it as a label or slap a name tag onto a person and kind of box them into that identity, and that's just not realistic at all. It is like, it's kind of beyond me, honestly. Why would you approach a heart attack patient and then like give them the little hello my name is tag and put like MI on it? You're doing the same thing. So I mean, why are you now using that label that you've given them to dismiss the severity of their circumstances? Doesn't make sense. That said, we all have inherent biases that we have to check at the door, and every human is packaged up and, a little bow on top with inherent bias. So how do we mitigate this? We have to remain 100% mindful of our own thought patterns as we interact with patients on scene of a call. So before you take the patient's behavior, which is pathological in nature, remember that it is being caused by an issue that is out of their control, and they are erratic. They're cussing at you. They're calling you slurs. Stop for a minute. As frustrating as it is to hear these things, realize that behavior for what it is: pathological. It is being caused by reasons that we don't even fully understand, neurobiological and neurostructural in nature. And it is not them just being deviant to make your life hard. It is not them behaving erratically for attention. So, I mean, really, let's put that taboo stuff behind us finally, because why haven't we done that yet? Abnormal behavior and thought patterns are purely a distortion of their mind and need to be viewed as exactly that. So regardless of how the schizophrenia is making them think or talk, regardless of if this is relapse number 6 after, attempting to get through the Suboxone treatments and rehab, regardless of any of that, none of that has any bearing on their deservedness or worthiness of your time and attention. Encompassing the prior 3 factors that we just discussed, I think that the driving force behind all of our missteps is purely a lack of education. Historically, EMS has completely dropped the ball in psychiatric education, and reformation of education needs to be happening with a concerted effort. With that being said, let me say something very loudly and very clearly. We cannot hide behind a systematic problem and blame institutional inadequacy for our own incompetence. You need to be holding yourself accountable for your personal actions and holding yourself to a standard in which you are operating on complete integrity. So before you think that education stops beyond the classroom in your academy, stop while you're ahead, please. If you don't know and aren't comfortable with, the minimal amount of knowledge that you have on a given diagnosis, you should probably look into it and read up on it and educate yourself on it, instead of just saying, well, the call is over, thank God, I had no idea what to do and I felt very ill-equipped. Maybe you should do something about that. Just a thought. The same way that you need to know what the presentation of a PE looks like, you need to know what the presentation of psychosis looks like. So what happens if we don't? What happens if we can't? We tend to blame psychotic behavior on some kind of drug use presentation. And this is whether it's in the presence of or absence of classic signs of drug use. We get frustrated, we think that the patient's attention seeking, that they're being defiant just to make our job hard. So remember to maintain empathy and just listen. A lot can be learned through thorough and compassionate conversation with the patient that will inform you on what the best next steps are for them. So that leads me to a very real case of what happens when we don't do what we're supposed to do. This is a very tragic and fatal example of severe negligence for the psychiatric patient. When I was compiling research for this video, I stumbled across a news report on a young man by the name Paul Tarashuk. On September 9th of 2018, just around 11 p.m., A trucker who was stopped on the side of I-95 in South Carolina called 911.
I stopped a few exits back.
Parked for a roadside break, a trucker suddenly saw Tarashuk walking toward him.
He comes running up in my headlights at me.
The trucker called saying that there was a naked man running on the very busy lanes of the interstate and had also climbed onto the cab of his truck, disconnected the air lines to his brakes, causing his truck to stop after possibly riding on the catwalk of his truck for 2 miles after jumping onto the truck while it was stopped on an I-95 on-ramp. It was Paul. Paul was 26 years old at the time of this happening. He was such a kind soul, very selfless. I mean, he is so deeply missed. Paul was a son, a brother, and a friend to so many people who all love and miss him so much. Paul was known for being selfless and kind, outgoing, and he was just gentle when other people were going through very, very difficult times in their lives, and he was always there to help. At 11:28 p.m., police officers arrived on scene of the side of the interstate where this trucker had called. At this time, the body camera footage starts.
Have a seat.
Have a seat.
Sit down. So you will have to talk to us. Alright? What's your name? You speak English? Hey. Hey.
That's all. Again, 1 minute he's head up, eyes up, looking around. Next minute, head down.
Give me some light of me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Get ready to wake up. Pleasure. Want pleasure? Or you want me to have the pleasure? Pop it. Ready? Breathe that in. Here. Talk to me. Talk to me. If you don't want it up your nose, then talk to me. Stop acting stupid. You're a grown man. And what's going on? Don't shrug your shoulders and do your hands. Tell me. Open your mouth and talk to me. What's going on? Why are they out here on the interstate with you? Say. You can talk. Hey, you speak English? Yes. Yes. I think I've transferring before. What's your name? Alright, so check this out. Can you please tell us your name so you can take this out your nose? I know it stinks. We know it stinks. Come on, partner. It's just your name.
Everybody here's just trying to help you out, bud.
I've transported before. I can't remember where I transported from. I'm gonna try it again.
If it's an act, it's a pretty good act.
Yeah?
Because I see the same thing when I see a variety of drugs being used.
Yeah.
Now, if you're taking something, we're not here to judge you.
What you been
You don't
taking?
get treatment. If you're taking anything, we don't get treatment for it.
What you been taking?
We all just want to make sure you're okay. That's all we want.
So is that what they find him running down the highway or something?
Supposedly he was naked on top of the cab of a tractor. The driver said he picked him up. He doesn't know a whole lot. He can't tell us anything.
Where you from?
This young man's not saying anything.
You ain't got no ID? Hey, where you from? Seriously, talk to us. We want to get you some help.
I just want to go ahead to the substation and go to sleep. So if you tell me your name, we'll let you go so I can go back to bed.
She's being serious.
I'm being fucking serious. I'm sleepy. Give me a damn name so I can go home, for real. I'm tired.
What happened to your arm?
You been walking? How long you been walking?
That was from that damn blood pressure cuff that she just took off.
Leave me alone. I'm sleepy
Come
too.
on.
We're all sick here, okay?
Please give me your name so I can go home. I know you know what the hell we're talking about. You're just sitting there laughing and
What's your
bullshitting.
name?
So tell us your damn name, please. Rodrigo? There you go.
How about David? How about Kevin? How about Charles?
Can you please tell us your name? I really like to go home. Do you want to go home? Or do you want to go to the hospital? Or do you want to go to jail? The choice is yours. I can provide any of the three. So where you want to go?
I'm a patient man, but I've been out here for a long time.
160 over 78.
What's your name?
All right, hold on. Let's try something a little different. Hand me a piece of paper.
What's your name? It doesn't matter what language he speaks. He can speak his name.
Right. What is...
He's not a retard.
No. But if you don't want to talk, he can read.
He understood what I said. He read my lips.
He's laughing with us. He knows what we talking about.
Hey.
Yeah, see?
What's your name?
We're not going to sit on the side of the road all night with you. So what's your name?
What are you looking at me for? You full of shit, bro.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is. What's your name?
You don't want to talk to us? Yes or no? We know you can talk. We know you can understand us. You know, you got to be real with us. What is your
Shake
name?
your head, or if you do,
Okay.
you don't.
Do you want to go to the hospital? Yes or no? Do you want to go to jail?
Well, those are your two
Then
choices.
come on, I'm gonna give you a ride. You don't want to go to the hospital with you, so let's go. His vitals are good, ladies?
Yes.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Paul was not in his right mind. So when you watch the footage and he just walks right out of the medic unit, that should have never happened. They know nothing about Paul. They can't get anything from him, which is not because he's being hard-headed or stubborn. It's because he's experiencing a psychotic episode onset by Paul's schizoaffective disorder. It was further revealed that Paul had been traveling on the interstate accompanied by his therapy dog when his vehicle was run off the road. The stress, fear, and anxiety allegedly onset that psychotic episode, and his therapy dog has never been found. EMS released Paul from their care, and I say care very lightly, without obtaining a legal refusal. They also said that his vitals were normal when his blood pressure came back as hypertensive. He was 26 with no prior medical issues. What are you using to explain that? And the answer is they were trying to explain it all away with drug use.
A toxicology report from the Orangeburg County Coroner's Office came up clean. No drugs, no alcohol.
The officer who initially detained Paul continued to say that he didn't want to take him to jail or to the hospital, he just wanted to get him to a safe place, continued to drive to a nearby town where he dropped Paul off at a closed gas station.
This is the last time Paul Tarashuk is seen alive. No shoes, no phone, no idea where he is.
It's just watching him walk to his death. He was escorted by an officer to his death.
The following footage took place at around 6 a.m. that same night, only 4 hours after Paul was dropped off at a closed gas station without an ID, shoes, socks, a shirt, a cell phone, or any way of safely getting home. The same EMS crew and the same officers responded to a pedestrian struck on Interstate 95, and it was Paul.
I think I just hit a person on the interstate.
Body cam footage shows Paul laying on the side of the interstate covered in a white sheet as the same EMT and medic stood next to him saying, "If I had known this was going to happen, I would have taken him to the hospital."
Because if we'd have known he was going to try to drop him off, we'd have just took him to the hospital, dropped him there.
In the body cam footage, you can clearly see the significant amount of front-end damage done to the vehicle that struck Paul. That driver stayed on scene and called 911, but unfortunately, Paul had been killed. Still, to this day, 5 years later, this is an ongoing court case. In terms of repercussions, no, the proper repercussions have not happened. They went as far as sticking an ammonia tablet up his nose. I mean, I don't know if you've ever smelled smelling salts, but it's enough to just get a whiff of that stuff, and they left it in his nose. He didn't even really react to it at all, and if that doesn't indicate to you that there is something more going on, I don't know what will.
Breathe that in.
He didn't flinch.
So there, I mean, at that point, someone should have stepped up and says, we got to take him in someplace. He's not just someone to let go.
The inadequate mental capacity of Paul that night was something that was recognized and then blatantly ignored. That was something that was never supposed to be and should never be ignored. And it also cannot be excused by, well, if I had known better.
They didn't do their job. That's it. They just didn't do their job. They didn't care enough about human life to do their job.
The preliminary documents being released to the public in the ongoing court case show that they even documented that he was A&O ×4. How would you know that? In the 12 minutes of assessment, and I use that word very lightly, he did not once give a verbal response to EMS. You know, his laughing, his silence, it was not within context. It was a complete demonstration of schizoaffective and psychotic symptomatology. Among the legal jargon and the implications of situations like these in the reformation of education, the one thing that stands out the most to me is that we can avoid a lot of very tragic situations by just acting with a little bit of integrity and a little bit of empathy. Paul was a young and bright person who was loved so deeply by his family. It's just unacceptable to see that this could have been 100% prevented, and it turned out the worst way it possibly could have. I had the honor of speaking to Paul's mother in the development of this video. I actually had learned Paul had actually saved the life of an old woman in almost the exact same situation as he was in. In fact, when he found her, I believe she was driving the wrong way on the interstate, and he stopped and stayed with her until first responders showed up, and when he was about to leave, she said, well, hold on, you know, I feel safe with you. And Paul actually went with her to the hospital and stayed with her until her family showed up. The sequence of decisions made by the responding agencies that night were devastatingly detrimental. That's an understatement. When you look at the wake of his loss, as reflected in his family and friends, Paul was more than a 911 call. He was more than just this bizarre display of behavior. And what I hope you take from this is that your patients are people just like Paul, and no one is immune to the outcome that he suffered if we let them go and don't provide them with the help that they need. I hope that this video was helpful in reshaping the perspective that we have unfortunately long held in the emergency medical community pertaining to psychiatric care. A huge thank you to Paul's family for being so kind and so open in sharing his story and truly taking this tragedy and using it to reform emergency medical response everywhere. So that's it from me. Thank you for watching.